and to those of you whom I have not had the chance to see personally, I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here. To the build leaders, thank you for helping all of us build to where we are and to get better, and also thank you for inviting me. This morning, I have been asked, I hear that you had a couple of provocative sessions, and I hope that my remarks will not let you down in that spirit, but I've been asked to do something really hard. It's really to take a look at kind of where we are on this pre-K to K and beyond systems of linkages. And for this presentation, I did a little bit of reflection, but also a lot of projection in terms of some of the issues that indeed we are facing. So what I would like to do, I'm going to ask you to bear with me, is to really talk a little bit about the issues that we're grappling with, and then offer some personal thoughts on where we are and what we need to do. I'll give you a preview because it's in your comments. I thought hard about what the gives and the gets are for the relationship between early childhood and K to 3, and hopefully we can have some good conversation about that. So let me begin by just saying that there are lots and lots of rationales for why early childhood and the K-12 system should come together. And to the experts in this room, I don't need to really go over them in depth, but it is a good reminder when we are speaking to people outside of our own inner circle here. One is that there is a strong developmental rationale. Indeed, we all know that young children are very fragile, as at no time in their lives. And we also have a great deal of research, attachment, and learning theory that substantiates the need for the continuity or for the continuousness of development. If that weren't enough, we have a very, very strong economic rationale predicated on a history of research that show fade-out effects when indeed there are not good linkages between the pre-primary and primary years. And by the way, increasingly, I've just completed, some of you heard it, an international study of how countries around the world are using standards. And they very clearly use the words pre-primary and primary to distinguish between the stuff that happens before formal entry into school and what happens in formal schooling. And I kind of like that because it gets us out of the bag of all the debates about early care and education and early childhood. So if I'm referring to pre-primary, just to clarify, it's in my think now, and it's talking about all of us below formal kindergarten entry with primary including K. But anyway, we have decades of research about when those linkages are not made, what happens, and indeed, we have, and these data are not often cited, but I offer them to you for consideration, that there are very high social costs as well as economic costs that are associated with not ensuring effective transitions between pre-primary and primary. It's not just that when we do good in pre-primary, we sustain the gains, which everybody is familiar with, but that indeed there are real problems and real economic losses when those transitions indeed are not made. So if indeed we did not have an empirical rationale for what we're doing, we have got about 40 years of work on continuity and transition. And you would think that by now we would have nailed this. The reality is nothing could be farther from the truth. We really have been quite ahistorical in our orientation, not taking a good look at history and what we can learn from it. We have been a little bit disorganized in how to organize our thinking and our work. And I would submit to you that although we have tried very, very hard, conceptualizing our way out of these multiple boxes is really complicated. Is that my point? No. Okay. So I have taken the liberty of titling this presentation Early Childhood and K-12 Education on Paper Chains and Permanent Linkages. Obviously, the paper chains refers to the past because paper chains, while they do hold together for a while, can be easily pulled apart. And what I think we are about stepping forward, and this is a paradigm shift, is about creating those linkages that indeed will be permanent. When I look back, and I promise I will zip through the history and focus more on the present, but it is important, I actually see 3 stages to our work on these linkages. One is what I would call the transition phase, very, very long. The second is what I would call the alignment phase, and the third is what I would call the pre-K to third phase. In looking forward, I want to pose a way to act with intention and then raise the challenges that I think we face. So let me begin with the transition phase, and to my, where's Maryland? No, Maryland's not here. Oh, okay. I was going to apologize to my colleagues in Maryland because I did a little bit of a version of this, although this is amplified for them, so they've given me feedback on this. I would regard the transition phase as a little engine that could. We all know the story. It keeps pushing, it keeps pushing, it keeps pushing. It never quite gets there. So there was an acknowledgement that there was misalignment between pre-primary and primary education. We tried scans of different approaches. We actually involved some pretty nuanced definitions of transition. And we also learned that research in this area can be beguiling, if not misleading. With regard to how we define transitions or this linkage between the two, some people thought of it as just the period of time, and way back when, it was all you had to do was transfer records from pre-primary to primary, and you were indeed engaging in transition activities. Other people moved beyond that and thought, you needed ongoing activities, no activities. We began to understand that there were differences between vertical transitions, or the transitions that children made as they moved from 0 to 3, pre-primary, 3 to 5, and K, moving kind of up the age ladder. But also very importantly, that there were really critical horizontal transitions that we weren't paying enough attention to, notably the linkages between health, social services, family commitment and engagement, and from caretaking settings. What did the research base tell us? This country spent a great deal of money, $60 million in 3 different $20 million transition efforts in the 70s and 80s. That was a lot. It's a lot of money now. It was a lot of money back then. A lot of it was supported by Head Start, and I really want to shout out to those of us who love and cherish Head Start very, very deeply, that Head Start indeed was our national laboratory for research and advancement, research and demonstration in early childhood, and it is to them that we owe a lot of this. So here are the first 4 of these were actually funded out of the Head Start Bureau, Head Start Agency. It had different names in its reincarnation. And if you look, it goes all the way back to the Follow-Through Project in 1967. I'm not going to bore you with the results of each of these studies, except to say that indeed, when we looked at follow-through and plan variation, we understood, and there's an accordion theme to this, that was really looking at curriculum models. We had the sense that we had to do something to make sure there was continuity in curriculum. And so we looked at Bank Street, Wright-Wrangham, and a whole different models, and tried to evaluate them, and found that there was no model that really worked, right? So it almost doesn't matter what pedagogical approach you use, so long as there is intentionality, that there is program design, and that there is ongoing assessment done. The data were dismissed because children were too mobile, there was incomplete implementation, and indeed limited conceptualization of transition. I should say that everybody but the federal government dismissed this because, as you know, following the study on follow-through, the famous Westinghouse report, Head Start was put in serious, serious jeopardy. Well, some years passed, we did project developmental continuity, and it was decided that focusing only on the curriculum and the content, the pedagogical content, wasn't enough. And so project developmental continuity ended up with these 7 components. Now I ask you to look at them. Administration, education, bilingual multicultural, services for handicapped children, parent involvement, developmental support services, including health, nutrition, and social services, and training, which is what we call it then professional development. As you can see, the embryonic roots of what is being talked about today actually had a very deep history. The lessons learned from that were it was impossible to do, forget it, no single site was successful in implementing it. We went from there to the Head Start Transition Project, and they felt that developmental continuity was too broad and moved back in, narrowed it down a little bit, and really focused on what indeed were the very core elements And indeed, you see individual meetings with parents and new school representatives during the first month of the child's transition. We got back a little bit to this activity approach, visits of kindergartners, pre-kindergartners, and kindergartners back and forth between Head Start classrooms, distributing summer reading lists. You're all familiar with this. Didn't work. Too limited, too focused on one-time activities. National Transition Project, 1992, rather than trying to mount an approach, this study, which was funded by the United States Office of Education, Department of Education, looked at what's really going on. And it took stock of what's happening in schools and found out that the situation regarding these linkages was pretty abysmal. A limited number of districts, 21%, pointed out that they were doing anything related to transitions. It was very, very, very marginal. Longitudinal study and abecedarian, most of us look at these as our data source for the cost effectiveness data. Very few of them really acknowledge A, the role of parents, and B, the role that transition or continuity played. But there were, in both of these efforts that contributed to the long-term financial savings that we accrued, very significant foci on parent engagement and on these issues around transition. You can look up here. Can you all see this so I don't need to read it all? Or should I talk about it? Can you see it? No. Yes? Yes. Okay, fine. Basically, what this said very simply was you needed more components and that you needed to focus on the school community and school linkages. The findings, I think, are all known to us now, but basically, what I want to point out, well, let me just do abecedarian and I'll come back to the findings on both. Similarly, abecedarian, our wonderful model, also indeed concentrated on not only parent engagement in meaningful ways, but also on transition efforts, largely between home and program. Now, what both abecedarian and Chicago found out, that a transition effort alone can't do it. What had to happen was the transition effort had to be linked with very high quality preschool programs. And if you only had high quality and didn't have transition, that wouldn't make it either. So we suddenly got the emergence, and very underplayed, everybody, we've got the emergence of these two parallel things that need to happen in order to affect really positive gains for very, very young children. What does all of this tell us? It tells us first that what we're talking about, these linkages, are not easy to implement. It also says that there has been a yin-yang in our social history, moving from efforts that are concentrated on pedagogy to those that are looking far more broadly. We know that despite all of our efforts historically, the issue of these linkages is not very prevalent, despite lots and lots of efforts. We understand that you can't just focus on the activities because it's not going to do it. We understand that transition alone will not do it, or alignment. You really need to work with a high-quality program. And it really suggests that there is no durable embeddedness of a commitment to these linkages. So that ends sort of what I would label as the transition phase, when we were calling all this transition.